Welcome to a new edition of the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino. On this episode, we talk with business coach, recovering politician, and podcast host, the great Paul Johnson. He opens up about his diversified life these days, COVID, American optimism, and so much more. He was the mayor of Phoenix from 1990 to 94. He has a podcast called The Optimistic America, and he strives to be the best he can be. And during these modern 2020 times, he has a very triumphant message about America for the world to hear. He is an American treasure. He has plenty of stories to share, and he is a man for these times. Enjoy this interview.
Paul, thank you for taking a minute out today. I appreciate it.
Sure.
I'd like to start out and ask you, how did you do during COVID? In your line of work, how did you survive through that 2-year window now that everything's waking up, and how did it change you?
Well, I live in Arizona, and candidly, I think we ended up better off in Arizona than many other places in the country. Certainly, they shut down most of the restaurants, most of the schools. There was a kind of a difficult period of time that we went through on that, but our economy just kept going. It was amazing how resilient the economy was during that period of time. I'm 63. I have 14 grandchildren. I have 3 of my own children. I spend a lot of time with them, and I watched a lot of my daughter-in-laws and a lot of my nieces who, literally had to leave work and stay home with children to be able to help educate them and get them through their classes, which was an experience for all of us. There were times when I would end up taking some of their kids just so that, they're little kids. It's hard for them to focus when it comes to schooling and education. And so they took so much time and attention that by being able to pull off the older ones, it really gave them the ability to focus better. It was a great learning experience, I think, for all of us. One is how much work our schools actually do and how important they are to us. My theory of COVID really was we still spent a lot of time around one another as family. And I'm definitely a believer. I believe in COVID. I believe in science. I believe in the vaccines. I know that it was a serious, critical issue that we were facing. But I also think people being connected to other people is important, and that there are real health consequences of not being connected to other people. We're mammals at the end of the day. And I always there's a great book called Younger Next Year that talks about the 3 most important things to be able to keep yourself younger long term. And one of them is being connected. They talked about a herd of deer where you'll have a buck that's in the center and all the other bucks are on the outside kind of living alone. But one day, a young buck will come in and challenge the older buck. The older buck will lose. He'll move to the outside. And he never lives more than about 6 months, ever. Right. The idea that a person who's been married for 50 years and one of them passes away and the other one dies 6 months later, that's not a statistical anomaly. We need to be connected. It's ingrained in our DNA. And to me, the most damaging thing that happened during COVID was the loss of that connection. We were all being, even in our family, even though we spent a lot of time together, we were being much more careful because we were concerned about the effects that it might have on grandma or grandpa or parents or other people inside the process. But I do think that at the end of the day, we've been granted a gift. When the Spanish flu took place, I think there was little doubt that, they had no ability to come up with a vaccine in 12 months. The idea that we have a society and a scientific community and the ability to create manufacturing and distribution to hundreds of millions of people, a vaccine within a 12-month period of time from when we identified as being a problem, we should look back on that with awe. Instead, we look back and we're upset with the 26% of the people who didn't get vaccinated. I think that's the wrong way to look at this. The right way to look at this is to say, oh my gosh, I can't believe how well we actually did.
I love that viewpoint. I really do. And I think that there's so many parts of what I hear from people and stories that it's almost as though people feel a little guilty saying that it was a time for reflection and slowing down and catching up and being with family and all of that, because you don't want to sound callous. You don't want to sound like you're cheapening the fact that there was a lot of woe and death that happened. I don't think anybody is, but I think there's that notion that, at the end of the day, wow, what if there were silver linings that I went through? But I also believe in what you said, too. If you look at it from that vantage point, you can't help but rear back and think, wow, because even with the Spanish flu, I heard enough stories. I mean, that would wipe out whole families. I mean, without a doubt. I mean, they used to hang the red cloth on the front door and all of that to signify that, and it was a horrible time. But also, too, I even think I'm a product of the '80s. I'm a Gen Xer, and I think if this would have happened when I was 12, because if my kids were young and they're preteen, teenagers now, they wouldn't have had all this ability to connect and see things and do things and have all of these things at their fingertips that help them be connected to the outside world. So I also think about that as well.
I think sometimes we're way too hard on ourselves. Like, we look at the conspiracy theories that exist today, and the thought is, oh my gosh, this is all brand new. I was mayor of the city of Phoenix back in the 1990s. And I can tell you back then, we put up these artistic statues one day, and I remember we did one in a little community, just little pieces of art that were around trees, that was built next to a hospital and a high school. And the hospital, so they made some of the statues doctors and nurses. The high school was the Vikings, so they made one of them the Vikings. We had 1,000 people that came out upset about the fact that we were devil worshiping. Conspiracy theories aren't new.
Wow.
Right? The idea that you have people that will do that, we shouldn't be so down on ourselves. Of course we do. People who don't know what information to trust, they don't know whether or not government should be trusted. Of course that exists. But if you look at what we've been able to accomplish from a technological and scientific standpoint, and how we had a lot of people who died during COVID, but we saved a lot of people. And, if when you begin to think that maybe we weren't so successful, look at what's going on with the Chinese today. Right? They created the image of having a drug that could solve the problem. They created the image of being able to deal with it, but they dealt with it through a true authoritarian lockdown. We resolved ours with science. It was still science and rationality that ruled the day. And I just look at that, and I don't look back on this and say, wow, that was a terrible experience. I can't believe what happened. I look back at it and say, oh my gosh, I can't believe we were able to pull off what we pulled off.
I think that's a wonderful standpoint. I do see now why you're dubbed the American optimist. And I do find, too, and it's interesting with your background, you've seen so many of these things, and we historically do. And I think the youth don't realize that at the end of the day, the cycles that we go through as humans, it's like a carousel. I always remember there used to be a cartoon where they were talking about Billy Martin, and it was a gag about how it was a carousel. Like, he would hop on one year, hop off the next, hop on the next year. And he was just a revolving historical door, and Steinbrenner was always going to get him back. And I think it's the same thing with all these conspiracy theories and all of these things. And it's been ramped up because we've never lived through a time period where at any point right now we can go to a computer and find out anything that we want, whether it's true or not. We have our fingertips on the pulse of so much information. It's almost dauntingly scary as humans to have that.
Yeah, the key is you need to start with understanding how is it that what is agency? What is agency? How can I lose it? Who is it that's trying to take it? What are the effects that come from me not being able to own my own agency? Now, we are being bombarded with negative messages. The nightly news is bombarding us with a negative message. In social media, it's bombarding us with a negative message. And that's because there's a negative bias in the human brain. They get that financially, if they can get you to watch a negative message, you'll turn that television back on tomorrow, or you'll stay on that internet just a little bit longer. And it loses the ability to get to that neocortex portion of the brain where rationality, optimism, creativity, and innovation exists. You need to understand that there are people that want to take that agency from you, but you have to own it yourself. Now, the steps to doing it, I found over and over again, there are really a handful of steps that are important to owning your own agency. The first one is knowing the truth. Again, we can look back at this past experience with COVID and have a very, very negative viewpoint of it. But the truth is, we pulled off something amazing with technology and science. If you look at it and you compare it to any other period of time, you'll find we could never do what we just got done doing. That's true in everything. The world isn't getting worse. Overwhelmingly, in the United States, through free markets, through democracy, we've been able to improve the human condition more than anybody else, anywhere else, at any time in history. It's amazing what we've done. And if you look forward and you realize what it is that we're working on trying to do now, driverless cars, cure cancer, extend human life, things that you would have thought would have been a myth, that couldn't even possibly happen 10 years ago. We're now beginning to realize they're real. They're within our grasp, right? If you look at how we did that by government's done some wonderful things. They've created bridges and dams and roadways. They've got people to the moon, created public schools. But the single greatest thing that our government ever did was it empowered the individual over itself. And by releasing that human spirit, by releasing the genius of the individual, we've dramatically multiplied the amount of people that are working on problems, the amount of people that are out there trying to find solutions. That's the truth, right? And when you get to the next issue, it's, okay, if that's the truth, then I have to start to recognize that I'm being fed information by a lot of different groups who are telling me something that's the opposite. What do I need to do to counter that? Well, at least make space for optimism. If you're watching negative news hours on a day or looking at a computer that is taking you down those rabbit holes, you have to find a place to be able to get some alternative information that will let you know that everything isn't as bad as what they're trying to sell you. The next thing that you have to do is to realize that you can start over. And I can't tell you how many people I know that because of this whole era that's happened in our political process where their brother-in-law and they won't talk to one another because of politics, or them and their mom won't talk to one another. You have to start with the knowledge of you shouldn't give up on people you love for people you don't even know. People that you don't even know in politics, right? Politics is important, but it's always going to be the place that we go to settle our differences. So of course it's controversial, right? We're settling big problems there, but look outside of that and look at the wonderful gifts that we have in this country and why it is that it's worth holding on to it and being able to keep it. I also think you have to focus on strength over safety. We've gotten into this era where, people are demanding safety in so many environments. Our college campuses that don't want to hear people because they disagree with their thinking. I was a Democratic mayor. I'm an independent today. But the idea that you wouldn't let a conservative come onto a campus and speak, we can't solve this problem if we decide that we're not going to listen to people who think differently than us. The idea of creating a marketplace for great ideas is a long part of our history. It's not something we should abandon quickly. And then you have to find meaning. And meaning, Viktor Frankl said there are three areas where you find meaning. One is in what you create. The second comes from what you love or who you love. Right? And then the third comes from struggle. Right? Meaning is much more important than happiness. If you focus your life on happiness and your parents pass away or your children pass away, believe me, you're going to be unhappy. It's just going to happen. That's part of life. But you can keep meaning. Meaning is something that can be consistent. But again, it comes back to we've got to restore our sense of agency in this country. That's our key. And if we do that, there's no doubt in my mind, agency trumps authoritarianism all day long. There's no way places like China and Russia can keep up with us if we're able to make certain that the American agency, the belief in the individual, is still there.
That's wonderful. That's fascinating. I'm curious, with your background and with what you do, if you were in front of a bunch of grade school kids on a career day, and they looked up at you and said, what do you do for a living and why are you qualified to do that? How would you answer them?
Well, first, I would tell them to not do what I've done. I would tell them to focus. Right? Figure out what it is that they really like and they enjoy, and then focus on it. I have spent a number of years in politics and government. I own a healthcare company today. I'm in business with 5 of my 9 brothers and sisters that are in the real estate business. I tend to I tend to like variety. That's part of what makes me happy. Now, why am I qualified to do it? Oftentimes, like when I became mayor, I was 29 years old or 30 years old, something like that. And it's real easy to look at that and say, well, what makes you think you were qualified? And the answer is, I probably wasn't. I just was more qualified than the other people who were running, right? I made a decision that this was something that I wanted to do. And by doing that and by focusing my life on it, I was able to be successful at getting there. But getting there is just 1/100th of the battle. Then you got to do the job, right? So, I'll hear people all the time that say, well, wherever it is that I'm going, I want to get there on my own. I don't want help from anyone. That's a terrible mistake. That's terrible advice, right? What you have to do is once you get there is keep it. Nobody can help you keep it. You have to keep it on your own. But the idea that you use other people to help assist you, we're supposed to be connected. We're supposed to help other people in their journey. And it's okay for other people to help us in our journey. Usually, unless you have some core competencies, you're not going to get there anyway. So you may end up having to take an evaluation of why you didn't get there. But I would tell people always utilize other people to be able to help you, to introduce you to people who might give you the job, to talk to you about what the right job for you might be, to give you advice on how to be able to be successful in the interview. Utilize other people in the process. It'll do two things for you. Number one, you'll have a better chance of being successful at getting there. But number two, as you create those connections and those mentors, you allow people to put their arm around you to help you. Those connections can last you a lifetime. They're very, very valuable, not just from what job are you going to get, but from a human experience standpoint.
So you obviously are very, very driven, come from a large family. I'm curious, how did you get this? How did those seeds begin in you for this motivation and this thirst for not only being an optimist, but to always push yourself? I mean, I think there's something to be said about people that live as long as you've lived, that continue to see things in an optimistic way, because that seems to be the first thing that goes. I mean, when I get on a college campus and I'm around those kids, you can just feel the future and that optimism that brims. But you get around a lot of people that have been around a decade or two more than them, and it just starts waning away. What happened in your childhood to give you this motivation to be who you are now?
So my dad and his brother hitchhiked to Arizona when they were 7 and 11. Their mom had died. They came out here on their own. They shined shoes. They had no real formal education. They ended up being picked up by a guy who kind of taught them how to become a subcontractor, and they went into business. My mom and her sister, they picked cabbage. Both families, if you had 4 quartiles in the economy, they definitely came from the lower quartile. I grew up in a neighborhood that was pretty poor. 5 of the kids that were kind of my best friends, 4 of the 5 died in violent settings, generally related to drugs. I was fortunate. I had a group of people around me, had a large family, which helped me be connected, which is why I stress to people all the time, find ways to be connected. It helps to be connected to other human beings. Number 2, be careful who those people are that you're connected to, because when you think you're trying to save the devil, oftentimes it's the devil that captures you. You need to make certain that you put yourself around a group of people who have common ambitions. I think those are important as well. But gratitude is key. It's easy for me to look back and go, well, I've been lucky. I've been given a lot of gifts in life, and I have been given a lot of gifts in life. The real reason, though, for my optimism, it's just rationality. I look back. I've been mayor. I've helped run presidential campaigns. I've been engaged with a lot of different businesses and a lot of different people, and I'm a student of history. I look back. Things are dramatically better today than they were 500 years ago, better than they were 100 years ago, better than 50 years ago. Our lives are improving dramatically. Maybe our politics isn't. Our politics sometimes stinks, but it always has. That's politics. Again, I spent time in it. It's the place we go to resolve problems. And they're deciding constantly. Yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. which means that there's a percentage of the public who doesn't like the answer that they're getting. You have to do it, but the idea that we're upset with them, yeah, okay. What portion of our life comes from politics? What, 5%? 6%? It's a low portion of it. It's necessary, it's important, but don't let that skew your point of view. And again, if you look back at how much progress we've made, at what we've been able to accomplish, it's unbelievable. When I grew up, we didn't have air conditioning. Right? When we grew up, 75% of the homes in Phoenix didn't have air conditioning. And believe me, this is a hot place. Today, low-income housing has air conditioning. Right? Today, back then, very few people did trips. Very few people traveled around the world. Traveling, it's something of the middle class today. Everybody's traveling, right? If you look at the average size of the home, the average amount of cars that people have, if you look at what percentage of their wages were going out for those things, it's dramatically gotten better. Dramatically. Now, there are some things that costs have gone up. In fact, there are 3 things: healthcare, education, and government. Those 3 things as a percentage of your income have gone up. But almost everything else has dropped as a percentage of your wages. So if I look at that and say, well, what was the secret? What made that work? Again, I come to, we have great things in this country. Our geography is great. We have an Atlantic Ocean on one side, a Pacific on the other. We're as secure as you could possibly be. Our demographics are good. We're a growing population. We should be very happy about the millennials, because the millennials are bigger than the boomers, which means we're going to be able to pay those retirement costs that come from it. And our institutions, while they're troubled, they're certainly not as troubled as other places in autocratic societies. But the single greatest thing that we have has been this focus on the individual. And it's through that we've been able to create this incredible progress. So I look at that and say, well, rationally, if that's true, we should keep getting better. Now let's take a look at what people are doing today to make it better. You go into college campuses and go into their research facilities, go into places where they're inventing new products, go talk to companies that are trying to put new product out. It's unbelievable what we're going to do in the next 20 to 25 years in our society. We may wipe out the DWI industry. How would we do that? Cars drive themselves. That's a dramatic shift. Right? We're not only talking about medicines that may get us away from chemo to cure cancer. We're talking about drugs that literally may be able to extend human life and to extend the quality of human life. Just looking at it objectively and rationally says to me, we should be very optimistic about who we are, where we are, and what we're going to accomplish.
I agree. What's the greatest thing that you feel like, or what are you the proudest of that you did as a mayor?
The truth was, I don't know the things that I did I'm as proud of as I am as proud of the people that I represented. It was an incredible gift, right? I learned a lot about my society. I learned a lot about people. I learned a lot about myself and having to make difficult decisions and the challenges that come from that. And it's a gift that was given to me by the taxpayer. For those 10 years, I was a young person, but I was serving, and the taxpayers were paying my salary to be able to go out and learn an incredible amount. It was fun. Now, it's Phoenix. Phoenix is, I used to meet with the 10 big city mayors, Dinkins from New York, Daley from Chicago, Bradley from Los Angeles, and they would tell me about these incredible problems, right? The snowstorms and the dams breaking and the racial riots and garbage strikes and all these other things. I remember one time they turned to me, I was 30 years old, and Daley said to me, he goes, "So Johnson," he said, "you're in Phoenix, it's February, what's the big problem there?" And I couldn't think of anything, so I finally said, "Those golf greens, if you don't get them just perfect, people go nuts out there," right? And said, "Oh, you're not really a real mayor." But that's an exaggeration, but Phoenix is, it's just a good place. And we don't have as many problems, and people are very optimistic here. And we're not nearly as, you'll find places where they become divided. Anytime you start to blame people for your problems, when you start to say, well, the problems are, it's the business community, or it's the wealthy, or it's the minorities, or it's the immigrants, or anytime you get into that problem, the challenges exacerbate themselves. Because once it's somebody else's fault, you can't fix it. All right? It's somebody else's fault that's causing it. Most of the problems that we have, we created, so we can fix them. If you can keep out of that divisive environment where it's business versus labor, where you have these polar sides, your chance of being successful dramatically increases. Now, like I said, I'm an independent, but what I've seen is that we have, we've created these groups, right? One group that tells you that, that you're either going to be pro-business or you're going to be pro-labor. As if you could possibly be pro-labor without being pro-business. They're connected. Or you're either pro-business or you're pro-education. As if you could possibly be pro-business without being pro-education. They're connected. Or, you're pro-God or you're pro-human rights. As if God doesn't support human rights. Things don't have to be binary. There can be answers that you can find where both values matter. Again, that's a lot easier, I think, sometimes in Phoenix than it is in other cities. But in terms of our country, I've been all around the country. I've campaigned in lots of different places because I've helped people run for president. And what I've seen in that process is overwhelmingly the majority of America, the people that are there is what gives me the greatest faith in our future.
You probably operate as a role model for a lot of people, and you probably have for a long time. But who is your role model? Who's like a hero for you in your life that you always, get inspiration from?
So in terms of being a role model, I try to help mentor people, but I also try to remind people that I'm a human being. I'm as flawed as anyone. Human beings are naturally flawed. And we've gotten to this stage in our history where we like to look back and we say, well, Thomas Jefferson owned slaves, so he wasn't a good person, right? Well, this is my answer. I love Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King had some big flaws in his life. Thomas Jefferson, I love Thomas Jefferson. He had some big flaws in his life. But when you look back at this concept of individualism, Jefferson was trying to, we had a country, we had a union that was under a British monarchy. Our founder said, hey, we're going to create a more perfect union. They knew it wasn't perfect, knew it wasn't nirvana or utopia. It was just going to be more perfect than the one that they left. I like people who are idealists. Our founders were all idealists. They created an ideal in their mind of a set of characteristics and traits. They called them truths. We hold these truths. They created these ideal truths, and they said, here's what it should look like. And they aspired to something greater. And then we worked at doing that. It's a continual work. That's what Martin Luther King was doing. He took those ideals and even made them more ideal and said, this is what it should look like, and here's where we should move to. But I see it also in a variety of other people. I see it in firefighters and police officers and teachers. I see it in entrepreneurs who they're all putting forward this ideal of a more perfect union, of a better place that we can be in. And it's all of them working together that become our heroes. Now, again, I gave you some names of people that I like. I mean, obviously, I love Thomas Jefferson. I love Abraham Lincoln. One night I had a dinner with Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill and Pierre Salinger. As a young guy, there were 7 of us at a table, and I got to listen to Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill, which were just both amazing people, but it was the left and the right, all night long talking about these wonderful stories. When they got up and left, Pierre Salinger, who was a speechwriter for John F. Kennedy, he said to me, said, oh my gosh, he said, that Ronald Reagan and John F. Kennedy, they're so much alike. I said, what? How can you say those two individuals are so much alike? He said, oh, well, they're both great optimists. They both have a belief in who we are. They just have a different theory as to how to get there. That's who I love. Those are the people I want to be my mentors. We need people from the right and the left. They both offer something to us. The left offers us the ability to focus on programs that are important to people, and the right, they offer us programs that are important to the human spirit. Imagine this country without Hamilton and Jefferson, the left and the right of their time. Right? One gave us Wall Street and the United States Treasury and was incredibly brave on the battlefield. The other gave us the Bill of Rights. We can draw from both sides. We can benefit from both sides. And we're stronger when we recognize that by myself, I have weaknesses. But by engaging with other people, by partnering with other people, by allowing other people to be a part of the process, I don't get weaker. I get stronger. I get better at being able to do what I need to get done in every business I've ever formed. It's the strength of the partnership that makes it work. If two people think and act exactly alike, one of them's not needed.
In the realm of art and literature, what was the book for you early on that you read, the early part of the curtains for you, that made you love literature or an idea or reading? What was that?
I would tell you of older books, it was Fountainhead. I love Fountainhead. I like the Atlas Shrugged, but Fountainhead with Rourke I thought was a beautiful story because it was just so much about the human spirit and individualism and how it is that through owning what it is that we create, we're able to make incredible differences long term. I think Ayn Rand had, this is me personally, I think she missed one big thing. She was an atheist, didn't believe in God. I think she found God. I think she found God through that human spirit, through understanding how beautiful a thing that is. In terms of current books, I try to encourage people to read books like The Rational Optimist, Abundance by Peter Diamandis. I love Why Nations Fail by Professor Robinson. Peter Zehan's books I like. I forget what the latest one is called, but almost everything he's written is great. And also Professor Michael Beckley. But they're all spaces where they're all books where you can find a space for optimism.
So when you were a child and you were, out playing and doing your thing and just being a kid, what was your dream? What did you envision for your life when you got older?
When I was like 6 years old, my mom took me to a mall where Bobby Kennedy was speaking. And from that point on, I kept these scrapbooks, cutting out pictures of political events that had happened, which my dad did not understand at all. He had 8 children, and to him it was like, oh my gosh, quit spending time on that. But I've always, for a very long time, loved politics and how we work together, how we find a way to communicate and work together on solving big problems. I can tell you, though, I'm also in love with business. What I love about business is it's the same thing. You're focused on a big problem, trying to resolve it. The bigger the problem, the better I like it. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to create a better world for your customers, for the people you serve.
You've mentioned Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill. There's a lot of names that you've mentioned in this short amount of time. And you've probably met people that many people on this planet right now would love to have met once. But I'm curious right now at this moment, is there somebody on the planet that you would love to meet, spend 5 minutes with, and talk to?
Zelensky.
How do you think that's going to play out? Seems like his resolve's pretty strong. Seems like he's the right man at the right moment. What's your gut feeling on it?
Russia's made a huge mistake. So the narrative before this happened was that Russia had gained an incredible strength and that China was going to become the next superpower. They were going to surpass the United States. I think that if you look at the reality of that, the odds of either of those taking place are very, very low. If the things that make for a country to be as strong as the United States, there are a series of factors that go into that. First one's geography. Right? Geography is how secure are you as a as a nation because of your geography. Well, China and Russia are both surrounded by enemies, both of them, right? They're completely encircled. China's encircled. Well, Russia, they've had multiple border disputes. 2019, they had a dispute. China had one with India where they had a skirmish in the Himalayas. They're certainly in conflict with the Japanese and with Indonesia and with Taiwan. They are surrounded by embittered enemies. Russia, the same is true. The second issue is demographics. Demographically, both of those countries have very big populations. China mainly because of the one parent, one child law. But demographically, they're going to lose an incredible amount of people over the next 20 years that are going to retire and that are going to need to be taken care of. China, the estimates are they may come down to 600 to 700 million people. And then institutionally, again, we have problems in the United States, but I told you before, demographically, we're doing very well. Geographically, we're outstanding. From the Pacific to the Atlantic, the United States has no enemies. And then we have Mexico on one border and Canada on the other. You couldn't create a better economic fortress. And then you go to institutions. Again, we have some challenges, but they're not nearly as corrupt as the oligarchs in Russia or the party in China. Not nearly as corrupt. This idea that somehow or another you can have one strong leader and that they could make the right decisions, it's bunk. It's not the way it works. They're influenced by interest groups, by people that are making money. They're influenced by how it is that they stay in power. They're influenced by how it is that they keep their publics happy, or at least the portions of public that they need to keep happy. And then their economies. Our economy right now, we may be going into a recession. China, they've dropped from 8% to 6% growth, and people say that's not all that bad. Yeah, except for this. They're lying. We know their data's wrong. Most economists are saying they're overestimating it by double, right? And then added to that the subsidies that they're putting in. They're in a position where they're not going to outpass us over the next 50 years. The big problem that we have to worry about is that they're in a position where they may not be able to survive unless they strike now, unless they gain new territory and new economies. And I think they recognize that. They're clamping down on their societies. They've created an internet system with their ideas of social marketing where literally they can monitor every single post, where they can punish people instantly by cutting them off of credit or out of the healthcare system or sending people to their front door if they need to. They're trying to be able to gain a digital curtain across the world because they recognize that Western democracies have kind of seen what they're up to. You know, they got to where they were able to get to because we welcomed them in. Richard Nixon went to China, opened the doors to them, and everybody began buying from them, working with them, cooperating with them. But when COVID happened and they became more aggressive and people started worrying about the United States being there as their ally, the world began to recognize that China was not a sphere of influence that they wanted to fall under, because they're not going to be as magnanimous as the United States. The United States has a Navy that patrols the entire world to allow free trade without anybody paying us anything. Long term, we're in much better position than they are. Short term, I'm worried about them. I'm worried about the fact that they recognize the same thing that I recognize. They're in big economic trouble. Big economic trouble. And the only way that they're going to get out of it is by gaining the Ukraine into Russia, and then Lithuania, and then Poland, and rebuilding the Soviet Union, or gaining Taiwan and Japan, and grabbing those economies and putting them underneath their control. Their authoritarian government, Xi has said outright, they are threatened. They will always be threatened by Western democracy. Why? Well, because at the end of the day, we believe that the individual is more powerful than the collective, and they can't live with that. Their single party or their oligarch, they can't live with that concept.
Fascinating, for sure. So there's so many people that exist in your life, historically and even right now, that have a perception of you. You know, as a political figure, as a businessman, as a family man, you have all these perceptions from people of who they think you are. But ultimately, you live your life. You have a perception of you. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Just a normal person. I think that I'm in search of the same thing everybody else is in search of. The biggest thing to constantly be in search of or working towards is meaning. And meaning takes work. For me, meaning, what I'm hoping to create, hoping to build, I spent the first 15, 20 years working in the political system. I then moved to healthcare. Healthcare was about trying to ensure that people who can't afford healthcare could have access to it. We've built out a system now that's in 50 states that has medical providers in all 50 states, and we're one of the lowest healthcare providers out there. I'd like to spend the next 20, maybe the last 20, on trying to help Americans restore their sense of agency. But what does all that mean to me? Meaning, creating something that I think has some value, something that I enjoy and something that I like, being around people that I love. It's about trying to find that sense of meaning and hope. And maybe, if I get lucky, maybe there'll be something behind that matters.
Well, I can just tell in this conversation that we've had, and based on what you've talked about, you embody so much optimism and so much that I think that the regular person probably needs to hear to feel a little better about how things are going. I think we all get stuck in certain grooves, but you are definitely a very factual-based person that's dispensing wonderful ideas and optimism. This has been very refreshing. And for those out there that want to know more about you and your ideas and what you're doing and how you want to move forward in the next year, 5 years, decade, 20 years from now, how can they find that out?
So we have a podcast called The Optimistic American. You can find it on almost any different channel. We're focused on the idea of agency. But, the message that we try to give there, and we've got some great speakers on and people who I think they will enjoy. But really the message, the simple one, they don't even need to go to our podcast to gain from, is there is a great reason for optimism. If you live in the United States, you live in a place that has done more to improve the human condition than any place at any time in history. You should be optimistic about our future. If you're watching things or listening to people who are telling you otherwise, politicians or political parties or news media or social marketing groups, social media groups, turn them off. Quit listening. They're lying to you. What they're trying to do is they're trying to gain your sense of agency from you and then stand on your back to promote themselves. If you look at this rationally, you're in an unbelievable place with unbelievable opportunities. Take advantage of them. And you can't take advantage of them if you're terrified, if your negative bias is at work, if you don't have that frontal portion of the brain, that neocortex at work, where you can find the ability to innovate and to create and to find meaning.
That's wonderful. Paul, this has been so refreshing and illuminating. I'm going to really dive more into your podcast. I really appreciate your ideas, and I think that I can't put this any lighter. I think that what you're saying is paramount for the haves that exist in this country to come together to find a level of common ground and a level of confidence in who we are and what we are. It's pretty paramount, and I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir by saying that, but I think what you're doing is wonderful. Thank you for giving me
I've listened already to some of yours, and I'm pretty picky on programs that I go on. I never mind a fight or a disagreement. I think that's fine. But I'm really only interested in helping people who are trying to promote that same message. I know that you are, and so just to say thank you as well and to tip my hat to you.
Thanks for tuning in to another famous interview with Joe Dimino, where we cover the world of art, literature, business, politics, and music around the globe. If you want to hear more interviews, visit the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino channel on YouTube. Thanks again for listening, and until next time.